Now the latest ITV News in London.
Tonight, the cost of cleaning up the capital. The mayor's new pollution charge comes into force. Environmental campaigners say it will save lives, but for 100,000 drivers, life on London's roads is about to get more expensive.
So if I were to use this vehicle, say 5 times a week, usually I don't, but say that would cost me more than £3,000 a year.
Also on the programme, remembering Sabina Nessa, the primary school teacher murdered yards from her home. Her family say women still aren't safe in the capital.
Boris needs to do something. Sadiq Khan needs to implement something for us to feel safe to walk the streets alone.
All aboard for the trailblazer of the railways, the trials and tribulations of the man who was the country's first black train driver. And an early birthday celebration with the sounds and swag of the late glam rock legend, David Bowie.
I am a big fan of Bowie swag. I have a huge amount at home myself. So I think fans will love it.
Good evening. Sadiq Khan has called it a landmark day for our city. The new ultra-low emission zone came into effect at midnight, covering 140 square miles, or a quarter of the capital. It means vehicles that don't meet a specific set of emission standards now have to pay a daily charge of £12.50 to drive within the North and South Circular, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Environmental campaigners say it will save lives, while its critics say it's been rushed through and it's another hardship on the finances of businesses already impacted by the pandemic. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
The small print beneath road signs has been warning drivers what to expect. Today was D-Day for London's newest anti-pollution measure. The expanded ultra-low emission zone will apply 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Friends that come to visit us whose cars aren't compliant have to pay £12.50 for the pleasure of visiting us.
It's not on really, because it's hurting a lot of people on the lower wage.
It's a good idea, but just that it's being rushed. That's my view anyway.
The first ultra-low emission zone covered the same streets in central London as the congestion charge. The new zone is almost 20 times bigger and includes every road inside the North and South Circulars. Ella Kissy Deborah was 9 when she died after an asthma attack. Her mother Rosamond, who met the mayor today, says if the ULEZ had existed a decade ago, Ella might still be alive.
There wouldn't have been as many filthy diesel cars on the road, and it's the particulate matter and the nitrogen, the dioxide, which ultimately brought Ella's short life to an end.
Dave runs a scaffolding firm at Romford in East London. 70% of his customers are in the new zone, but his 2 trucks are old, so he'll have to pay the £12.50 charge.
It's going to have a major impact on us because we're going to have to probably avoid that and seek work in the suburbs.
Why don't you just buy new trucks?
Because of the pandemic, it's had a massive impact on our financial capability to be able to go and purchase a £20,000 to £30,000 vehicle.
Dave is among tens of thousands of drivers who'll be out of pocket. Transport for London estimates 110,000 vehicles a day will have to pay the ULEZ charge. Drivers who don't face a fine of up to £160. 800 cameras which can read number plates will help enforce the expanded zone. The Conservatives want an amnesty for drivers.
What we're saying is there should be a properly funded scrappage scheme, and we've identified that £15 million, and there should be a month-long amnesty from fines so that people do not wake up to surprise fines of nearly £100 next week.
Will TfL start handing out fines straight away?
TfL will make sure that anybody who comes into the area who doesn't pay the fee will be sent a fine. That's why it's so important.
So no grace period?
Well, I think it's really important that people recognise that the consequence of driving a non-compliant vehicle is more pollution.
Sadiq Khan said the new zone would allow 4 million Londoners to benefit from cleaner air. Simon Harris, ITV News, Stratford.
Now, it's estimated there are more than 100,000 cars, vans and lorries on the capital's roads that will be affected by the new scheme. Ria Chatterjee has been speaking to 3 people who still own polluting vehicles about why scrapping their main mode of transport hasn't been an option.
Sweeping policy change inevitably shifts the grains of everyday life. For some, the domino effect knocks hard. At this school for children with complex needs, the new ULEZ rules could have a lasting impact.
A lot of the children have needs on the autism spectrum, so our minibuses are vital. For many of our children, they really struggle to navigate and manage in the local community. Things like going to the shops, accessing a library, all those sorts of things are things that we have to teach our children. And for many of our families, they can't manage supporting their children in that type of environment. So it's for us to do within the curriculum. So the minibuses give us all sorts of opportunities.
Under the new rules, minibuses used for community transport don't have to pay the charge, but only for 2 years. The school has that time to raise around £60,000.
Hiya, you okay?
Time isn't on Nadia Essex's side. In fact, she already feels like too much has been wasted. Ezekiel is a so-called lockdown baby.
Really, the car is the only way we can get out of the house.
Which is important, why?
Well, I think anyone with a toddler will know that it's important to get out of the house. Not just for mental health purposes, but for developmental purposes. I mean, he was born a week before lockdown, so we missed out on pretty much the first 18 months. We had no baby groups, no mum groups, no classes, nothing, literally nothing. We were completely isolated.
Nadia has to send her car back to the dealership and will borrow her sister's to get out and about.
Here's that side elevating roof.
Meanwhile, Danny Haley has committed to a trade-off that's financially and emotionally costly.
This vehicle is no longer compliant. I was doing some sums before this. If I were to use this vehicle, say 5 times a week, usually I don't, but say that would cost me more than £3,000 a year just to go off to the shops.
At 73, he's using his life savings to buy a new camper van.
There's nothing to fall back on, really. I mean, like I said to you, I'm retired now.
Everyone we spoke to recognises the long-term wider importance of cleaner air. They also feel the particular personal burden of change. Ria Chatterjee, ITV News.
5 weeks after Sabina Nessa was found dead in a park in Kidbrooke, her family and friends gathered to celebrate what would have been her 29th birthday. The primary school teacher was killed while walking to meet a friend less than 5 minutes from her home. Now her sister, Jabina, says the Prime Minister and Sadiq Khan need to do more to protect women in the capital. She's been speaking to Natalia Jakera.
Sabina left a mark in many people's heart, and we as a family are very proud of her.
Sabina's family and friends gathered to celebrate her birthday, the first without her.
You just don't feel like this would happen to you, and the fact it has, it's just, there's not enough words to explain how much it's hurting inside. Like the world is carrying on, like who would have thought it's 5 weeks on that she's passed away, but it just feels like we got the news yesterday.
Last month, primary school teacher Sabina was killed just moments after leaving her flat in Kidbrooke. She was meeting friends at a pub 5 minutes from her home, but she never arrived. Her death shocked everyone in the community, not least her family.
And I can just recall that time when we got the call, going to my mum's, everything just happening. There's not enough words to describe how it feels.
Whilst police have charged 36-year-old Kochi Selamaj with Sabina's murder, her death has fuelled calls for urgent action to improve women's safety on the streets of London.
Boris needs to do something. Sadiq Khan needs to implement something for us to feel safe to walk the streets alone. We shouldn't be going home extra early just because we don't feel safe. We shouldn't. We are independent. We live in a country where we can walk alone, but we can't because of what's happening. What's happened to my sister, what's happened in the past. We need to make sure that this does not happen again. And Boris, Sadiq Khan, they need to step up.
Now Sabina's memory will be kept alive by those who loved her.
We're 4 sisters, not 3. We will always be 4 sisters, even though she's not here.
One, Sabina Nessa! Marking the anniversary of her life by sharing memories of Sabina, the daughter, sister, friend and teacher. Those here setting a new birthday tradition. Natalia Horquera, ITV News.
And the government say they've launched a violence against women and girls strategy and have invested £25 million into the Safer Streets Fund to ensure women feel safe in public places across the country. 8 people are still being questioned by police after 2 teenagers were murdered in Essex yesterday. Police were called to Regency Court in Brentwood at around 1:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. They found 3 people injured, including 2 teenage boys who later died. Essex police say they believe this was a targeted attack and there isn't any wider threat to the public. More than 50 people have been arrested after blocking major London roads. Protesters from Insulate Britain, an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, targeted busy junctions in the districts of Canary Wharf, Liverpool Street and Bishopsgate. The protests were the organisation's first since temporarily halting activities for 10 days. Richard Ratcliffe, the husband of British-Iranian citizen Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, is on his 2nd hunger strike in 2 years in an effort to get her released. Nazanin has been in Iran since 2016, having served a 5-year sentence on charges of spying and now faces another year in jail. She's always denied the charges. In the last few minutes, her local MP addressed the House of Commons.
I urge the Minister, for Nazanin's sake, for Richard's sake, for Gabriella's sake, and for the sake of all the British citizens who are imprisoned in Iran or at risk of being hostage, to commit to a robust response to Iran and a proper rescue plan for Nazanin.
I can assure her that the UK continues to have this as one of our top priorities and is the focus of all the conversations that we have with Iran.
Kensington and Chelsea Council and its tenant management organisation violated the residents of Grenfell Tower's human rights before the fire. That's according to Danny Friedman, the lawyer representing families of those who died in the disaster 4 years ago. He told the inquiry today that residents had fears that the building was unsafe as far back as 2010. Rags Martel was listening.
Playing with fire before the disaster. That's the accusation against the council that owned Grenfell, Kensington and Chelsea. Together with the tower's managers, they violated the human rights of the residents.
It was in their fears that their building was unsafe and in their helplessness that their concerns were not only ignored but actively opposed by their landlord and managing agent, who could act with impunity and did, we say, act in violation of their human rights.
This is the end of the inquiry's look at how residents were treated before the fire. 72 people died in the tragedy, and lawyers acting for survivors and bereaved blamed the council and its tenant management organisation for not keeping them safe.
Critical inaccuracies include failure to take into account the effect of combustible cladding and the presence of vulnerable and disabled people, and the consequential failure of TMO and RBKC to prepare personal emergency evacuation plans.
The tower's tragedy, the inquiry was reminded, was that several residents over many years warned that Grenfell was unsafe.
The tenants and residents had already been pointing out that there were deficiencies and there were concerns. We wouldn't be sitting here if people had listened, and not only listened but acted upon what the tenants were saying.
It fills me with upset and anger.
Edward Daffan escaped from the 16th floor. He was one of the residents who said Grenfell was unsafe before the fire.
There are still buildings up and down the country that are covered with exactly the same cladding as Grenfell was. And there are still residents up and down the country that are still being ill-treated and abused by their landlords with no recourse to the law to make things change for them.
But the lawyer representing the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation said Grenfell's flammable cladding was not an isolated case.
The fact that so many other buildings were and continue to be clad in similarly dangerous materials speaks to the very remote possibility that any one investigation would have exposed the deep-seated and far-ranging misconception that gave rise to the tragedy at Grenfell Tower.
And tomorrow the council will give its closing statement on this stage of the Grenfell inquiry.
Now, Rags, the finger of blame wasn't just directed at the council and its tenant management organisation, but also at the government.
That's right, Ronke. Ultimately, the people in charge are the government. They make the rules, they pass the laws. And at the time of the Grenfell fire, councils were operating under something called the Local Government Association's Fire Safety Guidance, which the inquiry heard today was and still is unlawful and unacceptable.
The ongoing fault, and indeed scandal, lies with government, which for over a decade now, and over 4 years after the Grenfell fire, has failed and still fails to declare that part of the LGA guide unlawful and unacceptable.
Well, Danny Freeman urged the inquiry to write to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, about this. We asked the government for a response, and they told us this. As part of the steps we're taking, we've conducted a consultation on personal emergency evacuation plans, specifically for tower blocks. But 4.5 years on after Grenfell, survivors say progress and improvements are far too slow.
OK, Rags, thanks very much. Still to come, we'll have the weather forecast, plus I'll be chatting to England football legend David James about how old boots can help save the planet. And Bowie's back. A new pop-up shop opens in London 75 days before his 75th birthday. But first, a plaque has been unveiled at King's Cross today for a trailblazer of the railways. Wilston Samuel Jackson moved to London in 1952 and became Britain's first black train driver just 10 years later. His appointment sparked a furious reaction from some of his white colleagues who tried to prevent white men working under him. Sam Holder has his story.
Until Wilston Samuel Jackson, there were many who didn't think a black man was capable of driving a train. He started as a fireman, shoveling coal into the blazing firebox that powers steam trains. Despite racism and outrage from his colleagues, he refused to give up on his dream and passed the driver exam first time.
I can remember how happy we were as a family, jumping up and down when he came home. My father was very open about the struggles that he had, about the brushes with racism. He came home and he spoke openly to us as a family because he wanted us to be prepared for what we were going to face.
Here's the Flying Scot at around 90 miles an hour.
Wilston, who drove trains including the Flying Scotsman, died in 2018. In 1964, he was involved in a serious crash, breaking both legs. He was in hospital for a year. He had to learn how to walk again and then went straight back to driving trains. Today, after 10 years of campaigning, his impact has been celebrated in a blue plaque at King's Cross.
It's one of the proudest moments in my life is for my granddad to be recognised for what he'd done. It's absolutely amazing.
I don't think personally I would have been able to overcome what he overcome in order to do this. And again, like my brother said, it's one of the proudest days of my life, and I'm so glad that I could see this. We're hoping that there's other people who's coming in another generations who can surpass this. This is only the beginning of our journey.
Still, decades on, people from black and Asian backgrounds are underrepresented in the industry.
The railway system in Britain would not have survived had it not been for the Windrush generation, and he broke a very, very fixed ceiling. We're not as reflective of the communities we serve as we want to be or we should be, We're making progress there, but we need to speed that up. And moments like this are as much about our commitment to the future as they are a recognition of the past.
In the crowd watching on, some of Wilston's great-grandchildren. One day they will learn how Britain's first black train driver laid tracks for generations to come. Sam Holder, ITV News.
The ITV News continues with the national and international stories at 6:30. Here's a look at what's happening with Mary.
Coming up on the programme, the price of petrol hits a record high. The cost of filling the average family car is now £15 more than it was last year. So what is to blame? The minimum wage will rise 6.6% next year, but it's not all good news. And the Manchester Arena victim taking his first steps. Do join me for those stories and more at 6:30.
A reminder of the main headlines in London this evening. The capital's pollution charge zone has become 18 times larger today. The ultra-low emission zone came into effect at midnight, meaning owners of the most polluting vehicles will have to pay a daily £12.50 charge to drive within the North and South Circular. And Sabina Nessa's sister has told ITV News London she thinks the Prime Minister and Sadiq Khan need to do more to protect women in the capital. Sabina was murdered as she walked to meet a friend in September. Former England goalkeeper David James is backing a campaign to recycle 1 million pairs of football boots that would otherwise have been thrown away. As part of the Donate and Claim campaign, anyone with spare football or AstroTurf boots can send them on to someone who needs them. The scheme will not only save families money, it will also help the environment. Rehoming the boots instead of sending them to landfill sites is equivalent to taking 7,000 cars off the road for a year. Well, I'm pleased to say David James joins us now. David, this is such a great scheme. Given the rapid rate that children grow, there must be so many pairs of old football boots lying around unused. Just explain to me how it works.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for having me on the show. Quite simply, as you say, there's around 1 million pairs of boots that are pre-loved, either sitting in cupboards, car boots or other places that could be rehomed and given to, I say kids primarily, but given to people to reuse and enjoy all the benefits, social benefits, mental health benefits, physical benefits of playing football. So, yeah, quite simple.
And the families recycle the boots, but are you getting clubs involved? Are they also in the academies? Are they donating their boots as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things. Football Rebooted has been sort of adopted by professionals up and down the professional level, from the Premier League all the way down. It's now available in schools, or going to be available in schools. And essentially the idea of just rehousing these boots or rehoming these boots is one thing, but also environmentally it stops the potentially 1 million pairs of boots going into landfill. So a lot of people have signed on for it. A lot of people are encouraged by it and already donating towards it. So it's looking like a very good campaign.
And I was looking at the figures today, and it's really sad to think that some children just don't take part in sport because they don't have the boots, they don't have the right equipment. I mean, this could really help, couldn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And you said it right at the beginning there, that kids grow so fast. I mean, this is me back in my old school in Welwyn Garden City. I was wearing a size 13, I think, at the time, 12 or 13. So parents having to buy new boots regularly. It's not even season on season. It can be during the season. We're in school holidays at the moment. I went past a football training session this morning, and I was thinking that there are kids out there that must be wearing boots that don't fit them simply because they can't afford to get new boots. And where Football Rebooted is fantastic, as I said, if it goes into the local community, these boots are there, they're available to pick up free, and these kids can actually go out and enjoy the game, as I say, mental, physical and social improvement, and enjoy it just because the boots are there.
It's a brilliant scheme. 1 million boots, almost as many goals as you saved. David James, thank you very much for joining us. It's now time to go on to the weather.
Making the most of it, whatever the weather.
Octopus Energy sponsors ITV London weekday weather.
Hello there. Well, half term for many. It's got off to a bit of a showery start, but the next few days look fairly promising. Fair bit of dry weather in the forecast through the middle part of the week, but worth noting as we head our way into the weekend, something a little more unsettled on the way. Now, it has been another fairly mild day today. That's the way it will stay through the rest of the week with a west to southwesterly airflow. We'll see this weather front wiggling around out towards the northwest at times, pushing cloud our way, but it won't be until Friday and into the weekend where the front itself starts to make some headway towards us. So out there at the moment, it remains very quiet. Any lingering daytime showers soon fading, and overnight tonight it should be dry and fairly clear. Underneath those clear skies, quite a cool night on the cards, lows easily down to around 5 or 6 degrees, and that could in turn give rise to a little patchy mist or fog by dawn. But any mist or fog will soon disperse tomorrow morning, then a dry and fairly bright start. I think from late morning we'll start to see cloud thickening up from the west, and for a time that could produce 1 or 2 spots of light rain or drizzle, but not amounting to very much. And towards the end of the afternoon that will start to pull away eastwards and we'll see some brightness returning. Temperature wise tomorrow not too bad at all, similar to today, highs of 16 or 17 degrees. Now we hold on to the fairly quiet conditions through the latter stages of Tuesday and into Wednesday. You can see that front just starting to nudge in out towards northwest there. So for Wednesday itself, a dry day, some bright or sunny spells. Little change expected on Thursday, albeit a little on the breezy side at times. For Friday, hopefully a decent start, but I think by the end of the day we'll see some more unsettled weather heading our way.
Octopus Energy sponsors ITV London weekday weather.
And finally, 2 new pop-up shops have opened in celebration of David Bowie's 75th birthday next January. One in New York, the other here in the capital. The London store is on Haddon Street, where he shot the cover for his 1972 album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. As well as a retail space, the pop-up has sound, video and photography installations and an immersive audio booth run by one of Bowie's producers. Anna Geary's been in Soho to find out more.
Celebrating the Brixton boy. 75 days before Bowie would have turned 75, a pop-up shop opened its doors in Soho. Press were given the first look, as well as those who knew him, like his friend Nile Rodgers, who teamed up with Bowie on one of his biggest hits.
Ever since he and I started working together, I called him the Picasso of rock and roll. The way that he would communicate with me was quite abstract, but I always knew what he was talking about. So we had an incredibly great working relationship. Some ups and downs, but not many.
The shop on Haddon Street is where Bowie shot the album cover for The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. An iconic location for fans, including this one. Jonathan Ross says the area makes him nostalgic.
Every time I used to come to Haddon Street, a friend of mine used to work in a restaurant just across the road from it. Every time I used to come out, I always used to stop and pay homage to the phone box, which is now sadly gone, and the sign above it, Quest, which was also, I believe, stolen one night by a fellow Bowie enthusiast. So it was a pilgrimage. I mean, I came here in the punk years and we all stood around outside and took pictures of each other in the phone box.
A replica of that phone box on the back of Bowie's 1972 album is in the store. There's also a dark, immersive audio booth for shoppers to escape to and consider how the capital informed his music.
Bowie is probably more closely associated with London than any other British pop star. He was a keen mod, he was obsessive about jazz, he spent so much time in nightclubs, and he knew most of the people in nightclubs by name, and it informed pretty much everything he did up until the mid-70s.
At that point, Bowie moved to New York, where a similar shop launches today. Both are open until late January next year. Is there life on Mars? Honouring the Londoner's legacy. Anna Geary, ITV News, Soho.
What a legend. We're back with the latest after ITV News at 10. Coming up, Mary Nightingale with the ITV Evening News. But from me and the rest of the London team, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.